Hello, everybody. Welcome to our chat tonight. We have a very complicated arrangement here because this is being recorded in New York and I'm in Sydney and I'm speaking to someone in the UK with incredibly difficult time zones we had to calculate. And the person I'm speaking to is Deborah Powney. Hello, Deborah.
Hi, Bettina. How are you?
Really happy. I'm so happy we finally arranged this. We've been trying to organise this for I don't know how many months when we first thought of it, and all sorts of things intervened. Now, Deborah is a UK domestic violence researcher doing a PhD in psychology, and you're focusing on recovery of male and female victims of intimate partner violence. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've summed it up in a great nutshell there.
And now, one of the things that interested me when I first heard your story is you got in this field because you were a survivor of domestic abuse in your first marriage. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, like you said, my first marriage was abusive, and when I finally got out of that, the abuse continued, and I wasn't aware of what the labels of that abuse were because I hadn't entered into this field at that point.
Yeah.
But if you needed a tick list of all the levels of coercive control and post-separation abuse, you could literally just tick every single one of those.
So you knew all about it. Yeah.
Sorry,
that's why you got involved in this field, is it? Because of that? That's
yeah.
Yeah.
It was actually I was actually dragged through court for longer than I was married, and to the point where I'd been single and not even dated for a couple of years, and then met my now husband, and
I assumed you must have a new, better version. Do you?
I absolutely do.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and but as I was going through all that, I'd hit a point in my life where I'd found myself in a situation where I was questioning a lot of what I was doing with my life, and my now husband asked me two distinct questions. One was, "What have you always wanted to do?" which was psychology, and the second one was, "What's stopping you?" So at that point, there was nothing stopping me, but I had a lot of questions in my mind because, quite frankly, I didn't fit the narrative of what a victim of domestic abuse was being presented as. And I didn't feel broken for life. I got a huge amount of really good male friends and family members in my life. There was no history of abuse in my family. And that led me to question the narrative regarding female victims. But then it led me to question the bigger narrative because I'm fortunate to have gender inclusive supervisor team, and although they wouldn't direct me to a path, there were certain nudges about, have you read this data and have you read this particular research, and that opened up the Pandora's box, shall we say, of research. And it just made me question the whole narrative that if myself as a female victim didn't fit this narrative, who else didn't fit this narrative that is really narrow and misses a complete picture, and then by default fails everyone involved in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, you make the point that it's this narrative, which is essentially very influenced by feminist ideology, is harmful not only to men who are being denied, male victims, but also to females and to children. Tell me what the impact on, I suppose, all those three groups.
Yeah. If one of the central premise from the gendered model for domestic abuse is that domestic abuse is perpetrated by men on women because they are women. And anyone that thinks I'm overemphasizing that just needs to go and check out the predominant female charities in the UK, where that's clearly stated. Now, as a scientist in training, one of the things that we're really promoted is this professional curiosity. And I think that statement in and of itself prevents that scientific curiosity, because it completely misses all the reasons why domestic abuse happens. And there might be a very small percentage of men that think that they have a patriarchal, in inverted commas, right to abuse women. But the majority of the reasons given are not that. It could be a trauma reaction, it could be learnt behavior, it could be mental illness, it could be addiction. You know, you're very aware of all the reasons why this might happen, none of which are being tackled if you put it down to patriarchy. And additionally, if you're a female victim and you're told that the reason you've been victimized is because of an accident of birth, how do you overcome that? How do you adapt to that trauma? Because essentially you are trapped into victim status by birth. So there's a lot of stuff there, but additionally, if that's the central premise that is guiding perpetrator programs, such as the Duluth power and control wheel, then all the reasons why domestic abuse happens are not tackled in any way, shape or form. And we all know that men are aware that they shouldn't abuse women, because we train it into boys from a very early age. Don't hit girls, no matter what they do to you. You can't hit a girl. And the power and control wheel is just an adult version of that statement. So for female victims, you're victims by an accident of birth, and male perpetrator programs are going to let you down. If you're a female perpetrator, you actually don't exist in this scenario. And therefore there are no perpetrator programs set up to help you. So you're condemning female perpetrators to a life of abuse, where they need treatment, they need support. And ultimately, at the centre of this really dysfunctional system are children that are witnessing this domestic abuse, and this dysfunctional ideology is leaving them in the centre of that.
And children being, you know, they always, of course, talk about the cycle of violence and children witnessing their abusive fathers and so on, and they never talk about what it's like to grow up with an abusive mother. And I've been hearing from people for years and years and years who've grown up in that situation, and how scary it is to live with a violent mother.
Interestingly,
have no escape.
But that was a theme that came through in a part of my latest research.
Now let's talk about that. So you've just done this big survey. And that was in the middle of the COVID lockdown, is that right?
It was actually born of the COVID lockdown. I had a study that was about to go live, which was a peer mentoring study for male victims, using the area that I live in, the Lake District, about using activity-based peer mentoring to help male victims. But we were just about to go live and we got put into lockdown. So of course that was, for want of a better phrase, furloughed. So as when Boris announced the lockdown, I was literally putting the finishing touches to that study to go, and then thought, well, actually, if we've got a lot of people in lockdown that might not have a great deal to do, I would like to put out a survey that asked a lot of questions. So I wrote down what would essentially become my wish list of a foundation study for male victims. And within that, I included 4 psychological scales that essentially takes the experience from when the abuse first started, how that manifested, how the victims coped, and how and if they have adapted, to give me some quantitative data. Yeah. And then there was also a lot of questions that were closed questions, literally yes or no. And also following that, a lot of space that people could give me qualitative data. They could tell me their experience.
Yeah.
So within that, I asked a lot of what I'm labeling myth-busting questions. And that came about because I wrote a chapter for the Male Psychology Network, for the Male Psychology Handbook, the Palgrave Male Psychology Handbook. Mm-hmm. And when I was researching for that, there was a lot of narrative around the experience of men without any actual research about men. So yeah. I would come across a paper that was researching women, and it would say female victims suffer a huge amount of physical abuse. And then it would be followed up with and men don't experience that same level of abuse. But there was no male victims included in the study. Mm-hmm. There might be some references to some that was based on very small samples, but there was nothing there. And so the myths tended to be around men can just leave, so they're not trapped, it's not coercive control. Men don't get injured, men don't feel fear, and they don't have long-lasting psychological effects.
Yeah.
So being a northern lass, and we just kind of get straight to the point on questions, very much like the Australians. Yeah. So I just asked those very questions. So rather than asking the victims about why didn't you just leave, I asked them what made them stay, which is a roundabout question, of a way of asking the same question, but without the sort of victim blaming element of it. And so I've just got a presentation up here that I did. So like any information that came from sort of Hines and Douglas when they did their research, the one of the key elements was that I would lose my children. And there was a real strong worry that not only would they lose their children, but they would leave their children firmly in the path of the abuse that was put onto them.
I must say I've spoken to a lot of men in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is the reason so many men stay.
Which is not.
They've got nowhere to go. They can't. They know Absolutely. They can't take their children with them most of the time because, you know, the chances are they'll be accused of kidnapping the kids. You know, also all the things that happen to men in these situations.
Yeah, and
actually, they've got nowhere to go. There's nowhere for them to go with the children. There's no shelters. There's no support. No nothing.
There are no shelters, so many of them are couch surfing, and you don't want to put your children through that. Or they're going to a homeless shelter, and you don't want to put your children through that. So it's if you are at the tipping point and you have to assess at that level, that's literally the lesser of many evils to leave them in that position.
Yeah.
But it's
also... But they then stay for years and years and years rather than leave their children to it, particularly if she's she's being violent to the children as well. He sees his role as protecting,
of course,
from that mother. Oh, it's terrible.
I had one particular gentleman that, because I asked them how long they'd stayed in the relationship, and I'd also asked whether they were still in or out. And if they left, I asked, how long have you been out of the relationship? And one particular gentleman had stayed in the relationship for 37 years, and he'd left a year ago. And so his data then goes on. The questions I asked literally say, so why did you stay? And he said, I had to wait until my youngest child had left home and was safe. And literally his youngest child, who is a daughter, had got married and moved in with a stable partner and had set up her own life. And then he was okay to leave. because he was concerned that his abusive wife was going to move the abuse, and he was a shield for his children for 37 years, and then once they were safe, he was finally able to get himself safe.
And of course, the other thing, men know if they try to seek help, or particularly if they try to tell any authorities, the police, social security, social service organizations, whatever, that he's a victim of violence. The treatment some of these men get is just extraordinary. They get laughed at, they get told to man up, they get sneered at. No wonder men are nervous of seeking help.
And often they don't recognize that it's abuse, because we tend to normalize female perpetrated violence to the point where it becomes humorous. Since being in this field, and this sounds really trivial, but it is just an indicator of how normal this has become. I was in lockdown. Me and my children have spent some sort of cinema nights together, and we've watched some sort of early teen upwards based films, so like Marvel and all those kind of things. And we were watching Thor, and there's a point where the female protagonist in that he's been away for however long, and he comes back, and she sees him across this rainy car park and walks up to him, and rather than embrace him, she slaps him. And she continues to slap him until he kind of says, "Oh, I'm sorry that I had to go away and do this business on this other planet somewhere," or whatever. But it's absolutely normalized that she can just slap him and slap him and slap him because she is a woman. It
drives me crazy. It happens in movies all the time. Comedies are full of women whacking men, and it's presented as a great joke.
It's hilarious to kick him right where you shouldn't and watch him fall like a sack. It's just but it's normalizing. If we did the same thing in children's films or early teen films for the opposite genders, there'd be a public outcry. Quite rightly, there would be a public outcry. But it's normalized. We even do it with language, henpecked and under the thumb, and we trivialize it.
Now, part of course, now that we have this grossly expanded definition of domestic violence when it comes to women, which includes emotional abuse, and a hell of a lot of men suffer from emotional abuse from women. I mean, I've always said we are the past masters at emotional abuse. We know exactly how to get under men's skin. If it's with a partner we've lived with for a long time, we know exactly which buttons to push to get him really upset. And there are a lot of relationships that operate with women totally controlling their men emotionally. And it's never discussed, and no one, and the chances of a man seeking help for that are just zero.
Again, we've normalized that. We seem to think the narrative is that we live in a patriarchal society, but to be honest, in the home, it's the matriarch that runs the family. It's and actually what came through, as well as emotional abuse for men, which is something that is never spoken about, is financial abuse. And so for example, the Duluth model it highlights economic.
And I think we better go back and explain the Duluth model for people who have never heard of it.
So this is a widely used wheel, and it's a wheel because it's round, and in the center of this is the words power and control, and it's split into 8 sections, and on the surface of it, those 8 sections are absolutely applicable in domestic abuse. So there's things like using intimidation, coercion and threats, economic abuse, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying and blaming, you could often call that gaslighting. Using children, and they have this other one that always makes my eyes start to flicker, which is using male privilege. Now, apart from that, using male privilege, any and all of the other parts of that wheel could be equally applied to women, but they're not in this situation. Again, because of that central premise of men commit domestic abuse against women because they are women.
Yeah.
So, however, all of those,
and because men are powerful because of patriarchy, and they have control over women. That's the assumption, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. And it really looks in the same way that we're seeing all the critical theory issues in America at the moment about power and oppression. This is what this wheel does. It encapsulates what the gendered model feels is the power of the male and the oppression of female. It's very reductionist in the way it looks at things.
Yeah, so this is a psychological model, and it particularly underpins the programs that are set up for perpetrators.
Yes.
For what they used to be called the Batterers program. I don't think
they did indeed, yeah.
And which are absolute, they're re-education classes where men have to go in and confess to the misuse of their patriarchal power and so on. I mean, I have this hilarious video I did a few years ago with a guy who contacted me. It was a crazy story because he was in a relationship where I think actually initially the woman was violent towards him, and they got into a sort of situation. I can't remember who called the police, but the police came involved, and in the end, of course, he got charged, as always happens, and he was sent to this program for re-education program. And he's a very smart guy, and he took them on. He took his educators on, and I mean, he knows all the research. He could quote what was wrong with what they were saying. He was asking for proof, and they threw him out of the program.
Yeah, of course they did.
And then the local magistrate demanded he go back. I mean, it was this saga. Anyway, if anyone's interested, I'll send them that video.
That's brilliant.
But, I mean, it's just madness, this stuff. And it's being used across the world, this sort of approach to re-educating men who are violent. And, of course, there are men who struggle with violence. There's no question about that. And they need proper help. But they're not getting it because they're getting this ideological re-education, aren't they?
Absolutely. They're not tackling the big issues. I mean, there's nothing in there that's saying what happened in the perpetrator's childhood. Do they have any addictions? Are there any mental illnesses or disorders here? So just getting someone in a room for a patriarchal struggle session is not going to change behavior. At best, you're going to get 12 weeks or however long it is of conformity just so that they can tick a box and get out of the room. Yeah,
these programs, we had a Royal Commission into Domestic Violence, and these programs were, discussed as part of that, and the experts came along, and it was patently obvious, of course, and there's no good evidence supporting the use of these programs that are underpinned by this Duluth model, and that was pointed out to the commissioners, and of course nothing ever came of it. They ended up arguing they needed a lot more money for a lot more programs that happen more often.
Oh, isn't it funny that that's always one of the recommendations? Oh, it's just going to take more time, so we need more money. It's always the case. But it's the issue is that there's an underpinning program that's behind this wheel, which is a complete through the line integration of every single agency, from the police, CPS, the judiciary, the treatment programs, the prisons, everyone. And literally in Pence's book about how this model got created and how it should be operationalized, it's literally saying We want to be part of every single agency that's involved with this, and every single person that's within that agency will be monitored.
And be mouthing the right platitudes about domestic violence. And that's right. I mean, I one of the things, sad things that happened to me is a good friend of mine who is a counsellor in Relationships Australia, which is one of our big guidance organisations, was fired, was pushed out of his job by this government-funded agency because he put up on his Facebook page, he mentioned an article I'd written where I pulled together all the research and Australian statistics on domestic violence. And they objected to the fact that he made a favourable comment about my article. And I mean, he was forced to resign because of that. And this is a government-funded, marriage counselling organisation, essentially, a relationship counselling organisation that proudly states that they have a feminist domestic violence policy. I think that's perfectly reasonable to promote that.
Well, it has become dogma, hasn't it?
Yeah.
This is removed from scientific evidence.
Yeah.
It's based on a myth perpetuating. There's. Yeah. I suppose I'm being really unkind there, maybe not, but let's say that they're focusing on one very small piece of a very large and complex jigsaw. And everyone knows you are never going to effectively tackle this if you only focus on that one particular piece.
Yeah.
And that's my real issue with the entire gendered model, that it's irrelevant at best and harmful at worst.
But they have an incredible grip. I mean, this is a very powerful industry, the domestic violence industry.
Huge.
Thousands and thousands of bureaucrats, I mean, femocrats really, employed to promote this ideology. And if anyone steps out of line, they get jumped on. This week, I was talking to a politician here who told me about the Greens party has just passed a motion condemning a recent research project by one of our best criminal statistics organisation, the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics, and they produced wonderful data during the early COVID months, pointing out there was no peak. They analysed the incidence of domestic violence during that period and produced documents saying, no, this whole argument that was being run that we need more money because all these women are being locked up with dangerous men. There wasn't any evidence for that. And here this politician manages to get the Parliament to pass a motion condemning that research because it went against the feminist party line.
This is the issue. They condemn fact.
Yeah.
They condemn research based purely on ideology. Yeah. And this is where it squashes scientific curiosity.
Well, let's talk about you, because you contacted me a little while ago to say that you are under attack for your research from an Australian researcher, a very well-known male academic who decided to have a go at you across the other side of the world. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, I'm used to getting it online from people that assume a lot of what I believe. Because I go against their narrative, they assume that I want to remove their funding, and I because I talk a lot about male victims, because I think it highlights the gaps that we aren't tackling. People assume a lot about me, so I get all sorts of stuff from really trivial stuff that's sort of calling me a pick-me or patriarchal handmaiden, right through to some which I think is an excellent band name, Patriarchal Handmaidens. My husband's a drummer, and every time I say to him, I've been called Patriarchal Handmaiden again, he always says, makes a great first album cover though.
That's a very good idea. Yeah.
So I'm used to that. And I'm also used to having quite lively debate on social media. So when I launched this particular survey, the academic in question immediately pounced on it and started to criticize it. And I count myself as being quite fortunate that I have a number of really great followers that have done independent research that really know their stuff. And so they challenged this particular academic. But I got to the point where it was taking up so much of my time, and I had to be online to monitor the survey, that I thought, actually, I wasn't following this academic, and in actuality, I had them on mute. And I got to the point where I thought, I'm going to have to block them, because this is, every time I'm trying to promote the survey, every time I'm trying to get more people involved, it's taking my time, so I'm going to block them. So the survey did what the survey did, which was incredible numbers of responses. And then once I got that boxed off, I went back onto social media as my kind of usual self and unblocked this person. But again, the interference got a bit too much. So I thought, I'm not even getting involved in this anymore. I've got more interesting things and more important things to focus my time on. So I blocked them permanently. Within days of that happening, or certainly within a week or so, I received an email accusing me of all sorts of things, but essentially threatening some level of legal action, or accusing me of defamation, and copying in my supervisor team. Mm-hmm. And this particular academic's, what I'm assuming is their superior, on university headed email, which, like you know, is just like receiving a headed letter through the post. Now, when I plan my day, I check my emails first thing in the morning, and it's usually really early. So as someone who is very used to having legal issues used against me, which my ex-partner did, I had a reaction to this. This was a triggering reaction, because I'm thinking, crikey, this has gone to my supervisor team, and there's a lot of stuff in here that's really potentially quite damaging. And then you start thinking, is this going to threaten my PhD? And then I start thinking, my family have made a great deal of sacrifices so that I can do my PhD, financially, time with me, other different elements. And it really gave me a reaction. So I immediately phoned my supervisor, who was immensely supportive, and then reached out to various people that I knew had been in a situation far worse than mine, but had experience, which was yourself. Especially considering that this particular person was in Australia. And
this is someone I've been tussling with for many, many years. He is a man who has no interest in telling the truth about other men, which is most unfortunate, and has built his whole career on misrepresenting men, which is, I think, an extraordinary situation to be in. Anyway, but I was very pleased we finally got some help for you, didn't we?
We did, yeah. Toby Young, who's created the Free Speech Union. Unfortunately, I was already a member, kind of anticipating this type of intimidation. And Toby helped me out immensely. But there's
very good. People should know that the Free Speech Union, I think most people on ThinkSpot will know about it, but it's an organisation designed to provide help for precisely this sort of situation where someone is being bullied on ideological grounds, particularly, and then providing support for people all over the world who are dealing with this sort of identity politics and so on.
But also the Free Speech Union isn't ideological based. They would defend me as much as they would defend someone who had a staunch gendered approach. This isn't about limiting speech. This is about expanding debate.
Yeah, which is very good. Yeah.
But it's there to ensure it's debate and not cancel culture.
Yeah. And anyway, you managed to ward him off, didn't you?
Yeah, but to me, there's a real concern about this because, you know, I'm a middle-aged woman that's been, you know, round the block a few times. I'm a bit long in the tooth. So after that initial reaction, I could reach out to people like yourself and Toby and talk to my supervisor team from a balanced perspective. But what if I was a 25-year-old postgraduate that didn't have that level of support?
Yeah.
Surely then I would either lose face or lose my faith in academia, and I might even leave the field. And
I was going to say, I mean, what people who don't know this field should realise there's been enormous amount of bullying of anybody who does proper research in the domestic violence area, and particularly someone who's interested in talking about male victims of violence or in any way challenging the feminist paradigm.
Absolutely.
People have had death threats. People have had their funding research withdrawn. They've been forced out of academic positions. I mean, the people who've done the most research in this area have been extraordinarily brave and come under incredible pressure. Yeah.
But what I find most disappointing is most reasonable adults, if they felt that things had gone awry, would contact the other person personally and have an adult conversation or say, maybe this has gone too far, or I'm feeling like this. And you would do it in a really balanced adult way. The way this was conducted was in no way like that. There was no attempt to contact me personally. There was an attempt to intimidate by copying in my supervisor team. And that shows me two distinct issues. There is no sophistication in this conversation. It is purely there to intimidate and silence. But it also shows a real lack of integrity.
Yeah.
And that is really disappointing, because I have a view that academics, if they are going to do scientific research, they absolutely need to uphold the view of integrity. And that was really lacking in this situation.
Yeah. And what's really frightening, it's not just in academia. Across the board, anybody who's dealing with this very vexed area of domestic violence, and particularly anyone who's making public decisions around it, say a judge or a magistrate or a police officer, people don't dare tell the truth about this issue.
Yes.
And I also did a video a few years ago with a chief inspector of police who was retiring, who came to me just out of the blue and said he wanted to talk about the role of the police in having to enforce unjust laws and the business of going into homes and having to listen to women, knowing that women were almost certainly in some situations making up allegations of violence, and they were forced to remove the man from his home in that circumstance, that sort of thing. And I mean, it was a very moving video we ended up making about that. But people in all these situations have learned to shut up.
Yes.
The magistrate doesn't dare say anymore, well, I'm not sure that I believe your story, to a woman who's making up an allegation of violence. Or, I mean, just incredible. The grip of this ideology on our whole system now.
Yeah, I've been known to describe this as a maladaptive religion, because if you dare to speak outside of the template that is literally micromanaged, then you're a heretic, and they might as well pick up pitchforks and chase you out of the village, because that they're just trying to keep any distraction away from their narrative. I mean, you can't, there seems to be this issue with removing due diligence in legal terms.
That's right.
You know, believe the victim. Well, there's a few words that you're missing there. You can absolutely investigate an alleged victim's story or issue that they're bringing, but you, by just subtly changing that language, believe the victim, you've already said, because the person they are accusing is guilty.
Yeah, that's right.
And just
look at the politicians. I mean, across the world in this COVID, alleged pandemic, in this COVID situation, I mean, politicians didn't dare stand up to the bullying from the feminists to say we need more money for women who are locked up with violent men. No one, they just lay down and gave money.
Yeah, I've talked about this. This is because this pitchfork mentality is they're trying not to just, because it's so important that they maintain this narrative. They can't just have a debate and disagree and have a reasonable conversation. They have to absolutely destroy the person making those remarks because they don't want dissent in the ranks. Yeah. It operates in an absolute ideological culture that if you dissent, not only will you be kicked out of that particular group, but we will destroy your life.
Yeah. And it means, I mean, what is depressing really is that they have total control over our media, and I'm sure the same applies to Britain as well. I mean, one example is we had a very good senator, parliamentarian called David Lionhelm, who did a great job they had the opportunity to grill bureaucrats about statistics and about funding and about these. And he had a go at the domestic violence funding for a particular television advertising campaign the government was running, which was all about respect for women. Domestic violence is all about respect for women. It's all about patriarchy. It's all about, and I mean, it was really offensive series of television ads they produced. And he had the bureaucrats there, and he asked them, what is the evidence to support the central claim in this documentary? And they fobbed him off, but eventually he was able to pin them down and say, I want to see the research. And all they could come up with, of course, was international research showing a link in across the world between patriarchy and between attitudes towards women and domestic violence. Because if you have countries like Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia,
of course,
countries, that's where it shows up. And of course, it doesn't show up in Britain and in Australia and in America. But so he just nailed them. And he absolutely, it was a fantastic performance. And of course, it got no media exposure whatsoever.
No, of course it won't.
No.
Because I was listening to something the other day that said feminism and feminist activism has been largely ignored, and there was a debate going on saying no, it's not been ignored, and it wasn't what the initial person was saying. What they were saying is we've kind of dismissed it and let them sort of get away with the behavior so much that it's become entrenched in every single aspect of what we do, even to the point that even if we have gender neutral laws, the guidance behind those laws for the judiciary will be gendered.
Yeah.
You can say, oh, domestic abuse happens to everyone, and we're going to write a law that states domestic abuse is relevant regardless of gender, blah, blah, blah. But then if you read the guidance behind that, which is usually hidden in the annals of judiciary training or something like that, just people like you and I that will go through that with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah.
Often within that will be a gendered approach to how you enact those laws. So the surface hides a multitude of sins behind it.
Yeah, that's right. Now, are you getting anywhere? Are there any signs of cracks in this monolith in regard to domestic violence in Britain?
Well, I would say yes. I follow in your school of thought is I'm just going to keep saying it till something sticks. But I have a real passion for data, but I mean that in the widest sense of the word. I feel completely honoured that as many men that filled in my survey trusted me enough to give me their data. And because of that, I don't want this just to purely remain in the world of academia. So I'm setting up a website. I've purchased the domain name of the Male Victim Study. And my intention is to repeat this every couple of years, so that what I've got currently becomes a foundation stone for data that can be accessible to anybody. You know, there's going to be really simply analysed data there that answers the questions. Are men frightened of their partners? Can they just leave? It's a myth buster, but it's also backed up by real in-depth psychological analysis.
Yeah. And
because one of the themes that came through on this current survey was coercive control, and there is rare studies on coercive control for male victims. Myself and my supervisor have decided to, very much led by my supervisor, I might add, decided to put out another survey that's coming up really shortly that focuses on coercive control for male victims. Because again, what tends to happen, certainly in the UK, now that we have a coercive control law, is that there's a lot of conversations that says this happens overwhelmingly to women and then doesn't happen to men, without the data to back up that dismissal. And that's not what my survey showed. So we're hoping to take this foundation stone of the completed one, add in coercive control, and then build on this bi-yearly. But one of the things I really want to do is open up this website so that people that are researchers, people that experience it, people that are just interested in it, anyone and everyone can add questions. So they might say to me, Debs, I need to add a question about the use of court orders or something that is really important that you haven't included. And they can take something from that website and it will be a nice sound bite. They can put it into presentations for GPs, for homeless services, but also that ordinary people, and I mean that in the best way possible, can challenge politicians. So when a politician is asking male victims and everyone that loves them, can I have your vote? They can ask the question, what's your view on domestic abuse? Are you gender inclusive? And if that politician says, oh, well, this is something that mainly happens to women, they can quote this data and say, actually, the Male Victim Study has done this international study that shows that men are victims. Men cannot just leave. Men are frightened and they suffer catastrophic psychological long-term effects.
Yeah.
So we need to arm the public.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I hope it all goes well. I hope it becomes a real institution challenging the new orthodoxy. And it's been very nice to talk to you, and I hope we'll keep in touch.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm sure we will.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. Thanks everybody for supporting me on my YouTube channel. I've got growing numbers of subscribers, which is really exciting. If you'd like to support me financially, go to my donate page on my website. Thanks a lot.